Installing a crankshaft into a case is not that difficult when everything is fresh and to spec, but life doesn't really treat us that way all the time. Today our job is to take this crusty old crankshaft and camshaft and get it to sit happily inside this tired old case, doing everything that we can with what we have available. If we can pull that off, we'll be one step closer to daily driving. We already have a case with a crank successfully bedded into it. This is Wheezy. This one spins nice. So that's what we're going for, but this is the one we did where we modified a number 1 main bearing to fit in the number 3 spot. This case has also been brutalized from a rod that let loose, presumably, in its past. So probably better to have a deep roster instead of put all of our eggs into this basket. So we might just build both of these up at the same time. We think this was our first success story with a line boring a case here at Haptic Garage. And so all that stuff looks good and measures out like it should. Our bearings are second oversized, that's 1 millimeter or 40 thou. They fit nice and snug down into the bearing bores. If anything, they're gonna be just a little bit tight. Now the real test is to get a crankshaft bedded in here, torque the case, and see if it spins freely. If those holes are too small, it'll bind. But there's a couple of things that stand in our way. One, this is an oversized flange here for a thrust because we need it. We got to do a thrust cut on this case. The other problem we have is our crankshaft truly is crusty, so we're going to have to clean this up too. Camshaft is really ugly for that matter, but that's what we're dealing with. We're just going to see if we can make it happen. It's the hard times engine build. So I think what I want to do first is thrust cut. This is just barely undersized. I'm talking like 1/1000th of an inch, 2/1000ths of an inch, depending on who you ask. It's at 0.865 thousandths of an inch, and stock is 0.868. That's my favorite number, 0.867, depending on where you read it. So we're just a little bit undersized, and that's enough. We want that to be a nice snug fit. So I just want to clean this up. We'll just barely clean up the back here, and then just do enough here to have a nice flat thrust. And that means if we're not cutting the case to a full oversize, we'll have to trim down the oversized flange on this number 1 main bearing in the lathe. I have one shot. This is the only bearing by this spec that I have, so I'll have to get it right on the first try. But once we have that, we'll have a full set of the bearings that we need. We'll polish up the crank and see how it fits. Let's start with the thrust cut itself. I want to start with a non-cut, so I'm just going to lightly press until it stops. So now I know my cutter, over on the other end of the case of course, is right up against the rear of the thrust surface. I'll put my collar in place and tighten it down. We'll go around hoping to hit nothing, but probably we'll hit some high spots along the way, or I just picked a low spot to push the cutter up against. Just a slight drag all the way around. This may be doing all that we need. I think I'm happy with that. We didn't actually do a real cut. Here's the swarf. Just this little sliver. It's blowing in the wind. That's how thin that is. I'll take it. Don't want to cut much here because it offsets the bearing. Let's move the cutter to the front and do a real thrust cut. I have the cutter backed all the way up against the bushing and locked in place because I don't want it to bang against the thrust surface. That would damage both. The idea here is to just do a cleanup cut on this side also, and we'll do the real work of fitting the #1 main bearing to this case over on the lathe to make our bearing fit this thrust surface. I just regard the case as more valuable than the bearing, so we'll go more sparingly with that cut, and we'll take the meat off of something we replace every time. Now I'm just going to go the smallest one here, 1.6 thousandths of an inch here. And I think that'll be as much cleanup as we need. The thrust really didn't look bad. That's what I want to hear. No chatter, very consistent, just a sliver. Okay, let's take it out and see what it looks like. We're going to need to go a little more. And this is why we do thrust cuts, folks. The bearing may have only been touching this part of it. So that would have been the low point. We just did a really light cut, and we only cut down here, which would have been the high point. Over here, we didn't cut at all. So yeah, just a little more to go. I can't even feel that. We can see it. Dragging this across the surface, I don't even feel the step that this cut has revealed. So we don't have far to go. Well, there I can feel it. A little heavier over here. All right, let's do it again. That was a nice cut. Let's do one more minimal cut and see if that did the trick for us. I'd say that was an even cut. Okay, we are now shiny all the way around. Let's see how it measures out. What we want is the same width all the way around, so we have a square cut. So this is 0.863, right on it, 0.863. So we're about 5 thousandths undersized. This side is a little bit snug, except for right there. But down there it's a little tight. Let's see how it measures. That's 0.863 oh, about 6. So a little more than 1/2 of a thousandth of an inch thicker over here. Probably not an issue. Let's see if we can figure out why though. This is the first half that we measured. I can see we didn't get totally down to clean metal. Just kind of shave the top off. Over here, it doesn't look like we did much cutting at all. And we did none trending towards the part that was the thickest. So we need to redo our cleanup cut. It's all right. Okay, folks, let's talk about this. The argument against doing this is none of the pressure of the clutch is on this side. It's all on the actual thrust surface on the other side. Another argument against this is we're moving the bearing forward in the engine case where there's no way to make up for that with an oversized bearing. It's the other flange that gets oversized. The theory is this hole is way bigger than the dowel pin, so we have about 1/2 of a millimeter in either direction. And if I keep my cleanup cuts to a few thousandths, we'll easily hit that mark with the dowel pin. Otherwise, we're moving too far forward in the case. But look at this in particular. We just cut the inside of this case twice and still didn't clean everything up. It's definitely better than it was, and that's kind of my point. If it can be done reasonably without causing other problems, why wouldn't you clean up the inside? Now, I'm a hobbyist doing this for me. If I was doing this for a customer, I'd need a better premise than that. But it's just me, so that's kind of my thoughts on it. Measurements tell me we have a square cut from front to rear. It came out to 0.8629. That's a 5/1000ths undersize. That means this bearing, which is 40 thousandths oversized, I'm going to be trimming off 35 thousandths of an inch of this thing until we have a snug fit against the thrust surface of the case. That's really the backing for the real thrust surface, which is this part of the bearing, the forwardmost part of the #1 main bearing. These little shims, we'll use 3 of them here, get sandwiched in between that thrust surface and a machined surface on the flywheel that pushes up against this. We look for an end play of, oh, I don't know, 4 thousandths or so. But we want it to be nice and flat and everything square and parallel and all that. So I have to make sure that when I trim this, it's parallel to this surface. And I'll be mounting this in the chuck based on this surface. So right now I need to make sure that this is clean and that it's parallel to this surface. So I'm going to measure it across these points here, all the way around. And if all those measurements are exactly the same, then I'm going to feel like those two are parallel and I'm good to chuck this in the lathe. Now I want to clean this up in such a way that doesn't destroy it. So really I need a flat surface for this. That's a job for a surface plate. What's a surface plate, you ask? Well, it's a really flat something, like a piece of granite, and they can be thick and big and all kinds of stuff. But for what we're doing, particularly when we're using sandpaper like this to flatten something, just go to the hardware store, to the discount tile aisle, and pick out a piece that's nice and shiny so you know it's pretty flat, and keep a little bit of fine grade sandpaper on hand. It's amazing how often having something like a surface plate is helpful in engine building. Okay, we're clean. Okay, that was the low spot and it moved about a 10,000th of an inch, so I think we're in good shape. That much will just wear. If it's truly a high spot of any amount, any measurable amount, I think it'll wear off. I just don't want to start off with things being out of whack by 1/1000th or something. That'd be too significant to me. All right, let's see if we can get this thing mounted in the lathe and carefully trim off a little bit. Until I come up with a more eloquent solution, these little pieces of copper held in by twisty ties are my soft jaws. What I'm trying to do is not damage the soft aluminum of my bearing. This number 3 main bearing is going to be used as a spacer, and I gave it the same treatment with the flatting and the measuring to make sure these sides are parallel. Now all of this is being referenced against the face of the chuck, so just making sure I don't have any swarf hanging out there. And once we get it all mounted, we'll measure it and make sure that it's as flat as we want it to be. Now that I'm kind of playing around with this stuff a lot, I've ground a tool bit specifically for this purpose, which I'm sure will be useful in other situations too. But it's basically a left-hand tool bit that is ground in such a way that we can reach back behind this flange and not interfere with parts of the bearing that we don't want to cut. Even with a purpose-built tool, things are a little tight back here. I want to make sure that these jaws aren't going to collide with my tool post. So I have room to do what I need to, but not much more. Okay, I think that's as true as I'm going to get it. Just looking to touch off right now, and then that'll be the basis of my cuts. So that was the first cut at 5/1000ths. Actually, I think I'll measure it and see if I agree that that was 5/1000ths. It's actually about 3/1000ths. So my touch off might not have actually made meaningful contact, but I kind of want a reference. I kind of want to know that I'm sneaking up on my final measurement. So I'm going to keep measuring my results to gain a little bit of confidence in my dials. Okay, that was an honest 5/1000, so I think the error was in my touch off. So we're just going to keep doing this, keep measuring. I really need to nail this because this is the only bearing I have with these dimensions. I'll have to go fish if I mess this up. I think that's good. Let's pull it off and see how it fits in the case. Now I have cut both of these surfaces that I'm trying to mate up. And so pretty good chance that I've got a sharp edge here that might interfere with things. So I'm just going to run over it with sandpaper real quick, just the very edge. This way it won't cut me. And you can really feel the difference. Just passing over 2 or 3 times with a piece of sandpaper, you can really feel the difference on a sharp edge. Of course, this isn't changing the functional dimensions at all. We're just rounding a, I think they call it a stress point. Okay, if anything, that's a little snug. Line up my dowel pin, at least the hole anyway. That's a little snug. It's not all the way fully seated here, but it's close. I'm afraid to cut anymore, so I'm just going to try this. I'm going to see if a little snug is better than a little loose. I don't think this is going to be enough to distort anything. Oh man. So okay, it's all an experiment, so we'll let it be just a little bit snug. Now I'm kind of anxious to do a test fit, so I'm going to polish up the main bearing journals here. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we'll clean up the rest of the crank later. But I want to try this out, so let's play around with the crankshaft a little bit. This is some fine grit wetter dry sandpaper that we're dunking into some WD-40. This shoestring is a good way to apply even pressure all the way around the journal as we rotate this sandpaper, and it's symbolic of our budget on this little project. This will at least keep it from messing up my bearings, and I'll spend some time with it to try and polish it up as much as possible. The game we're playing here is not going so far that we make it undersize. So we'll have to strike that balance between making it look nice and pretty and smooth like you would want it to be, versus being undersized to the point that you're not going to have any oil pressure. Either way, you're in bad shape. So we'll just have to find our balance. Now in theory this should be the easy one because it can't slide off. Let's test that theory. I think this one's okay for what we're doing tonight. I'm going to clean it up a little bit and then we'll fit some bearings. And that is where I ran out of video footage because life got crazy. I had to label everything, pack it up, throw it into storage, and other things took priority. However, I can't leave you hanging. We have to find out if this crank is going to spin happily within its bearings inside this case now that all the work has been done. So let's slap it together and see how it goes. getting to 15 pounds right now. That feels good. Let's go to 25. This feels okay to me. It's nice and smooth. It doesn't bind anywhere. We will be polishing this crank a little bit. So if anything, it'll get a little looser than this, but this isn't bad. Thinking back to when I was working on this, the problem I ran into was a little bit of camshaft binding, which was much worse on the Wheezy case, which is kind of these are sister projects here. Once again, we need a cam boring bar. I have faith that I'll either find one or figure out how to make one. And I think that's gonna be the next step on this case, just like it is on Wheezy. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We've got big things coming our way, details to follow, and we'll see you out in the garage. Good doggies.